Hey guys, what's up? Garrett Kinnen from On the Water magazine, and today we're going to be comparing and contrasting your run-of-the-mill baitcaster versus a DC baitcaster, or the digital control baitcasters. The Curado DC we have here, and also we have the new SLX DC. The SLX series from Shimano has been a very popular series of baitcasters, and now that they've brought in the DC component, it kind of just takes it to another level. In the past, the digital control reels have always had a very high price point, upwards of, over $400. That's stuff for someone who's fishing just for fun and, on their free time to want to drop that kind of money on a baitcaster that has the digital control. And it's also challenging if you don't necessarily know what benefits you're going to get from spending that money on those. The really cool thing is the Curado DC that came out a couple years ago is at the $250 price point, and the SLX is at $190, which is another step down in price, but also has that digital control component. We're going to be comparing and showing why you might want to look into getting a reel with the DC component to it, as opposed to getting a standard baitcaster that does not have it. I've been using the Curado DC for the last couple months, and honestly I was really interested in seeing having that DC component, which I hadn't used before, would it actually make a difference in how I fished? And the answer to it was yes. So when you see the DC, that just stands for digital control, and the digital control is the braking system. So the DC has a completely sealed microcomputer in the reel, and this is going to analyze the spool speed at 1,000 times per second, which is faster than you're going to be able to do. With how fast your brain is going to be able to get to your thumb to start stopping that spool is not going to be faster than the microcomputer inside the DC reels. And so what this will do is give you maximum casting distance, and easily you can switch through different weights and style lures without getting backlashes and still being able to maximize your casting distance. That's the big piece of this. A DC reel is actually probably the best reel to start learning how to use a baitcaster, and it may seem strange to want to spend that kind of money if you're like, oh, I just want to try out a baitcaster, I'll get a $70, $80 reel. You're actually going to have a harder time learning how to throw a baitcaster successfully. The DC component just kind of is a little bit more forgiving when you're throwing into wind and you're trying to skip, under docks or under branches or into trees and things like that. It's going to be more forgiving than a kind of a run-of-the-mill baitcaster that you need to fine-tune on your own. The DC component really kind of eliminates all of that with 4 simple settings. So as you see, there's settings 1 through 4 on every DC baitcaster, and essentially what that is it's going to have a little bit less control as you go from 4 to 1. The traditional run-of-the-mill baitcaster, you're gonna have to adjust these settings on your own, right? So you have your brakes that are set from free to max, and so you need to adjust those on your own, and it does take a decent amount of understanding of how these work to be able to optimize your casting or adjust to the style of fishing that you're doing at the time, whether it's flipping or throwing jigs or you want to skip stuff under. If you have your brakes set very free and you try to start skipping underneath docks, it's gonna be really easy for you to backlash and get a bird's nest, because what happens essentially is that this line is feeding out, and as soon as that lure smacks the water, that line's just gonna keep spooling with the weight of that lure and the speed that it's going at, and that's how you get a backlash. So with the DCs, instead of having that dial that goes from max braking to free, you have a simple 1 through 4 notch setting, which makes fishing the baitcaster just a lot quicker to adjust. So if I have the setting at 4, it's going to break more quickly, and I'm not going to be able to cast quite as far, but so I'm going to want to do that if I'm doing something like throwing under branches. So with the 4, it's going to keep a slower control and more control over your line as it's going out. And if you flip that down as to 3, it's going to slowly give it more freedom, and all the way to the 1 is very free. And if you try skipping and you don't have great thumb control, you're probably going to get a backlash. Even with the DC, you're probably going to get a backlash. But at the 1, if you're looking to cast distance, you're throwing something a little bit heavier, and you've started to get your thumb control down, you can really cast to an optimum amount of distance at the 1 setting. I mean, I personally know bass guys that, you know, have 7 or 8 different baitcasters on their boat, and they've got one set for each, you know, each type of lure they're throwing, whether they're throwing jerk baits or jigs or topwaters or frogs or whatever it is, and they kind of keep that set for that, and they're switching through. And the DC, I've noticed that I can just, if I've, you know, I can flip on different lures and make adjustments to optimize my casting and how I'm gonna throw quickly. And on the fly, I can quickly swap one out and be like, yeah, I should probably knock this down to a 4, and if I feel like I need more freedom to cast farther, I just pop it to a 3, a 2, a 1, wherever it is, and you can really kind of just work your way into things. And as you're doing that, start to learn how to have better thumb control. I think that sometimes there's this misconception with DC reels that they're anti, like you can't get a bird's nest and you can't get a backlash. That's not true. You can. You absolutely can. But it makes it incredibly easier to know what kind of settings you're in. If you've got wind, you might want to drop that, you know, you're casting at a 1, the wind picks up, you might want to drop it to a 2. And it's gonna help control and give you maximum distance without possibly getting a backlash. So with most standard baitcasters, there's always some sort of drag on the reel and on your line as you're casting. But with the DC component, it eliminates that, which allows line to spool off at actually a 50% faster clip. Right, and so now if I'm skipping, I'll just show an example. I can skip that without an issue. So now if I have my baitcaster set at the 4 setting, right, we need to fix this. There we go. So if I have my baitcaster set at that 4 setting, it's not gonna give me that casting distance that I could optimally have, right? So if it's not going all the way out because it's putting more control and more, you know, it's increasing those brakes on the baitcaster. So while launching out the chatterbait, I felt like I needed to add a little thumb control because it was kind of over spooling a touch. So if I just throw that down to a 2, right? Because it can depend on how heavy or light your lure is. So if you're not throwing the heaviest lure, it may not completely optimize your distance, so you might need to drop down to a 2, because this chatterbait's only 3/8 ounces. 3/8 of an ounce? 3/8 ounces? Now I'm dropping it down to a 2, and boom. That got pretty far. That got just as far as on the 1. But if I was to possibly try to skip this, I'd probably backlash. So if I was to change this out from a chatterbait to a spook, I can do that, no problem. You can see my reel is spooled up. And if I'm launching this spook, that's almost gone. And it is way out there. Into the wind. But I am absolutely sending that thing all the way down there. And I can work that entire shoreline, probably 30 yards, maybe 40 yards of shore. I mean, it's probably 30 yards of shoreline that I just cast, and I'm working the spook all the way back. I mean, you're gonna be able to cover so much ground. Like from a boat, you could literally anchor up in one spot and cast, and oh. Now throw in a very different style, a little umbrella rig. Yeah, live target, little live target umbrella rig. And we'll still launch this thing. I mean, that's nuts. To be able to cast something like that far is pretty insane. And we got a fish on, first cast. Come on, buddy. First cast, fish on. Oh! Boom. On the live target. That is pretty cool. First go, man. I have not thrown this thing ever. Can't complain. Now I've got on just a small lipless crankbait, and I'll still be able to send this thing pretty far with the same setup, but I'm throwing an umbrella rig, a spook, a chatterbait. So I had that on the one setting, and I kind of got a little bit of a, I had some line kind of over spool a little bit. So now I'm just gonna bump this down to the 2. And no problem, still getting it way out there, a lot of distance. So I've been able to throw 4 very different lures with the same setup with just quick little, a quick little dial adjustment, knowing which numbers I'm at. It just makes fishing a lot easier, a lot quicker, and simplifies the reel a little bit, and lets you focus more on what you want to throw, where you want to throw, how far you want to throw, and kind of takes away the complexity of a reel and brings it down to a simpler, more efficient way to fish. So I'm really on board the digital control train. I had never used them up until this spring when I got my hands on one of the Curado DCs. I was honestly very curious about the difference between how fishing a DC reel versus a standard baitcaster would be. The biggest differences to me between a standard baitcaster, which you can still use and do well and cast far and skip under docks, and it's harder to know that you've adjusted your reel to exactly what you're fishing. I found that with the DCs it's a lot easier to figure out exactly how you have your reel set up. I can cast farther, I deal with less bird's nests. I think one point that I do want to make is you can still backlash a DC reel, it's just a lot harder. They've really kind of been able to get this advanced technology into these 150 sized reels and into a realistic price point for somebody who just doesn't have, who can't afford or doesn't want to pay, upwards of $400, $500 for, a DC reel. And now that they've got the SLX and the Curado that are at the $250, $190 price points, for what you're getting for $190 or for $250, it's a bargain. If you're interested in getting your first baitcaster or you're trying to learn how to throw a baitcaster, sometimes you may not want to think, oh, I don't want to drop $190 or $250 on a reel that I don't know really how to use yet, and I don't know if I even like them. You're gonna have an easier time with a DC versus a traditional baitcaster. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and also check us out for more information at onthewater.com.